All right. We're probably a little bit early for this class, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, I'm notorious. If I have a 14-week class, usually at the end of it, I still have enough left over. I could do at least another 6 weeks. So I tend to be slow getting things done. So we're going to go ahead and start. I don't know, 5 minutes early is going to get me to the end, but we're going to try. Um, I was I was gonna be here all early. I organized, and then I got halfway over here, and I realized I didn't get a rock. And my wife's like, "A rock?" And she knows that we're driving over. She says, "You're looking at rocks on the side of the road, aren't you?" I've done this before, so she knew this. But anyhow, so I did find one out here in the front. Gully out here, and I will put it back. Don't worry about it. Okay, so, but anyhow, so why do I need a rock? Well, you'll just have to stay tuned and hopefully get there. Okay, so first thing, um, does anyone know what HBRCB stands for? It's an acronym. I don't have any fancy words to help you remember it. I tried to invent some acronym things that kids could remember things by, but they never, rarely ever stuck. Uh, Anybody? All right, here, believe, confess, and be baptized. All right. Uh, 30 years ago, it would have been everybody, but yeah, that's okay. All right, we will, that's okay. That's probably a good thing overall. But anyhow, so this were the steps of salvation, right? And then people say, well, there's kind of a gap. We need to put something after that. That's not just it. Okay, you've been talking about baptism. Well, what happens after you're baptized? That's it. You're saved. You don't have to worry about anything. You're just done for the rest of your life, right? And so they said, well, let's stick one in there, and we usually used Revelation 2:11 or 3:11. Anyhow, 2:11, I think, where it says, "Be faithful until death." Okay, and that was it. Now, what does "be faithful unto death" mean? Or what did it mean then? I guess I should say when I was growing up. There you go. We withdrew from people, but the only people I ever withdrew from were people who didn't attend, which is kind of silly because they'd already withdrawn themselves, obviously, from the church, but we won't get into that. Okay. But if you attended, you were faithful until death. You'd just show up for Wednesday and Sunday and Wednesday nights until you died, and then you were faithful. See, piece of cake. All right. And that's handy. It's also very easy, relatively speaking. I mean, compared to a lot of other things we could be doing. But I think that's a little simplistic to say that. I would say we need to be a disciple. But what does that mean? We need to be a disciple. That's what we're going to talk about. I talked about it a little bit last week. But discipleship, what does it mean to be a disciple? So what's the word disciple? What's another word we could use for that? Believer. Okay. Someone who believes on, believes in Christ. Okay, good. All right. Anything else? Proclaimer. I heard. What else? Someone? What? Student. Okay, very good. I like student. Follower. A lot of times we see follower. In 1 Corinthians 1 verse 12, Paul talks about people in the church who are saying, "I'm a follower of Saul," or "I'm a follower of Peter," and he says, "What are you doing? Did Saul die for you? Is Christ divided in all these pieces?" He said, "No, you need to be followers of him." Okay. And so follower is a good word. Learner, a lot of those, all the believer, all those are good words, and that describes what a disciple is. All right. Um, Now, these days, if you follow somebody, what do? Click the button on on their account, right? Is that what if we're followers of Christ, is that what we do? We just click on a button, follow Christ, he'll update us every once in a while with a post, maybe a Bible scripture once a day or something, whatever. That's what does it mean to be a follower of Christ? Okay. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Um, just for the record, I was going to cut just to the meat of this so we can make sure we get to it. But there's certain things I can't pass up on. But just notice in the Bible there are a lot of people who are called disciples. There were Isaiah in the book of Isaiah. It talks about in 8 verse 11 and 12. He talks about those I have instructed. Now, in some versions it says God is saying that. Some places it says Isaiah is saying that. But either way, that word is disciples. Those that I have instructed. And that's the idea of a student or a learner that's following him. Okay. Um, in the New Testament, in Luke 5 and verse 32, they ask a question. They say, well, John's disciples and the Pharisees' disciples fast, and asking Jesus, why don't your disciples? So we have three sets of disciples. We have John's disciples, we have the Pharisees' disciples, and we have Jesus' disciples. Okay, so the idea of having disciples or followers, okay, not quite the way we think of followers now, but the idea of having followers was something they were very comfortable with and very common. And the last little side note I got to do is talk about what about those who are secret disciples, okay? We'll talk about it in a minute. That really is kind of an oxymoron. You can't be a secret disciple, all right? But it does talk about some secret disciples, and one of them is Nicodemus, and one of them is Joseph of Arimathea. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible, pretty much all the Jews, all the Sanhedrin said, crucify him, crucify him. But if you read there, it's not quite that simple. I mean, they obviously carried the day, okay? And they incited the mob and therefore carried the day. But Nicodemus, we know Nicodemus because he did what? He came to Jesus at night, and everyone said, well, I'll say he was afraid of what everybody else would say, which he might have been. All right? But the key thing is he came to Jesus. And at one point, when the Sanhedrin was discussing what to do with Jesus before they arrested him, he said, do we judge any man before we hear what he says and what he does? He stood up for Jesus in front of a highly hostile group of people who were trying to kill Jesus. And he said, hey, do y'all know what he teaches? Do you know what he does? He didn't say, I've gone and talked to the guy, but he did say he had talked to him. And so he was strongly enough to stand up in front of a hostile thing. Also, Joseph of Arimathea, when it talks about him, it says he was a member of the Sanhedrin who did not agree with their motivation or their actions. So there were some people in the Sanhedrin who may have got overwhelmed, but they were standing up for Jesus. And importantly, both of these men, at the time when Jesus was crucified, disciples were scattered all over the place. They went to Pilate and said, give us the body and we're going to bury it. So at a time when everyone else had deserted Jesus, they were there. Okay, so just for that. Those are disciples. I think they kind of get short shift as, oh, they were just secret and they were scared, but they also stood up a lot and stood up when it counted a lot of times. I would like to know what happened to them after Pentecost. Did they become members of the church? I don't know. All right. But anyhow, so what is a disciple? We said, sorry about teaching and learning, a lot of that. Let's look at Jeremiah 13, verse 23 real quick. All right. I printed out all my verses thinking that would be great, but now I can't find them. All right. First of all, a disciple, we need to talk about whose disciple are we? Because we can be a good disciple or we can be a bad disciple. Jeremiah 13, verse 23 says, can an Ethiopian change his skin or a leopard its spots? If they can, then you can do good who are so accustomed to doing evil. He says, your accustomed is to do evil. That same word there is to be a disciple of evil. The idea is the same thing, to follow evil. So we can be a disciple of evil. We can follow evil. And so it seems to habitually practice or to become accustomed or even trained to do evil is the idea here. And so we can be, like it talked about earlier, disciples of individual people like Paul and Peter and Jake and whoever else, or a certain elder or whatever. We can be a follower of people, or we can be a follower of Christ. Okay? And I think the idea here, though, is that this idea of being a disciple is habitual. It's something we become accustomed to. We get in a habit of, okay? It's a good habit, being a disciple, but it has to be something that becomes a habit with us, not just, oh, occasionally when it's handy, I'm a disciple. It's like, no, I've got to be one all the time. It's a habit. All right. So it is, we talked about being a learner, and that's a large part of it. The apostles followed Jesus, as well as a lot of the other people who were described as his disciples. All right. And they were learning from what he said. But I'm a teacher. All right. And sometimes someone would ask me, hey, how are those kids learning these days? And I'd say, well, I'm teaching. How well they're learning, that just kind of depends on the student a lot, okay? So the same thing is true. As a disciple, we have to learn, and we need teachers to do that, okay? And I know it's preaching to the choir, but I just wish we had more and more people in Bible class, because it's like, well, where do you learn? Well, we learn when Jake preaches out front, but we get a chance to discuss things and go over in more depth and everything in a Bible class. And so we can learn much more in depth. But is the goal of a disciple to learn as much as possible? Okay, that's the head shaking no. So then what is the purpose of a disciple? All right, it's got to get into our lives and sharing to other people. We've got to share that with other people. It's not just a standalone thing. So the word that says disciple says it indicates a thought. In other words, you think, you learn, you do that part of it, but it's accompanied by endeavoring to do something, to do things. Okay. Interesting enough, in Isaiah 50, verse 4, there's a prophecy where he says, I have learned to speak as ones who have been well taught. That would be a disciple, the same word again, disciple. And I have learned to hear as one who's been well taught. And that is a prophecy of Jesus Christ. He's talking about the servant who is going to come. Okay, so Jesus could be considered a disciple, but who was Jesus well taught of or taught by? Or who was he following? His Father. Okay, in John, the 7th chapter. No, that's not right. Sorry, try that again. John 14. There we go. Sorry, John 14. That's what happens when you try to be organized. I always thought people have all the slides and stuff. I constantly change and jump around, and it would never work. It would be a disaster. Okay, so anyhow, I should have just kept my Bible up here and just looked them up. But yeah, in John 14, verses 7 through 1, it says, because you have known me, talking to his disciples, because you have known me, you will also know my Father. From now on, you do know him. In fact, you have seen him. And Philip says, no, whoa. Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough. He says, show me what God looks like. That will be what we want. And Jesus replied to him, have I been with you so long without your knowing me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I'm united with the Father, and the Father united with me? What I am telling you, I'm not saying on my own initiative. The Father living in me is doing his own works. Trust me that I am united with the Father, and the Father is united with me. If Jesus was a follower of his Father, how alike were they? He says, we're like this. We're the same. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So if we're going to be disciples of Jesus, what should people be able to see? If they've seen us, they have seen the Father, or Jesus, or the Father, because they're all the same. Now, are we going to be exactly like Jesus? No. Okay, we're human, we're fallible, we make mistakes, but we're going to be trying to strive to be like Jesus so people can see that. In Luke 6 and verse 40, it says, maybe I should have put page numbers on these, I tell you. All right, there we go. Luke 6, verse 40. A disciple is not above his rabbi, but each one, when he is fully trained, will be like his rabbi. If Jesus is our rabbi, our teacher, the one that we're following, then we're not going to be better than Jesus, but we are going to try to be like. When we're completely, fully trained, he says, we should be like Jesus. And so people should see that in the way we live. Okay? And we get in this thing that we think that if I live a really good life, I can save myself, right? And that's wrong. We cannot earn salvation. It's a gift of God through grace. But on the other hand, we have sometimes getting the thing where, well, I was saved from my sins. I'm going to church. I'm being a good person. I'm not doing bad things. Haven't killed anyone, haven't stolen from anyone, haven't done all that bad stuff. So I'm good. If we're not doing things to follow after Jesus, if people can't see that in our lives, we're not a disciple. Okay? I mean, it's one of those things we can't really hide it. Kind of like the light on the top of the hill. If we are following Christ, we're a disciple of him, we're following closely, people will see that. If they're not seeing that, it may be just that they don't realize it, but it could also be maybe we need to look and maybe we're not living quite as much an example, as much in the steps of Jesus as we think we are. All right, that's a lot so far. Is there any questions or comments? Not careful, I'll go into preaching mode, you know. Yeah.
I think just in my study, what I've come to realize or understand is that the rabbis in Jesus' time, when they would call a disciple, they would live with them.
Right.
24/7. If they hopped, they would hop.
Right.
Whatever they ate, they would eat. Whatever they drank, they would drink.
Right.
And so you were not just, I think it's even deeper than learning. You weren't just learning, you were becoming
Right.
them. Their thoughts should automatically turn into your thoughts.
Right.
And I think that kind of helps us understand a little bit of what we're really called to.
Right.
When we hear the word discipleship, it's more than just
Yeah.
a knowledge base.
Right.
Life should look like that.
Everything we do has to reflect that and be part of that. You're right. I think so. And they gave the commitment. Like I said, it wasn't just well, I'll do that on Sundays and weekends or Saturdays. I guess it would have been Sabbaths. But it's like, no, I'm going to be their disciple. They had to go and follow them all the time. It was a full-time thing. All right. Good point. Anything else? All right. Well, let's talk about then, how do we know if we're a disciple? What are some field marks? Okay. I was a bird watcher. I guess I still am, but I don't really go out and do a lot of trips and stuff. But I like birds. And my frustration is someone say, "Oh, you know birds. I saw this one out in my front yard." I'll say, "Well, what color was it?" "Well, I don't know. It was kind of green, maybe gray. I don't." Okay. They said, "Did it have like an eye stripe or markings around the head or a patch of white in the wing?" "I don't know." Like, I thought you said you saw this bird. Okay. All right. So I learned pretty quick that, once you get used to something, you used to look for certain things, okay. Anyhow, so those are called field marks, things you look for the bird to identify it. Does it have, like a mockingbird has white tail feathers, it has big white patches on its wings when it flies? Okay. You see that. Wrens pop their tail up, whatever, but there's things you look for and you say, I know what that bird is. Now, there's a few that are just really tough. Okay, sparrows are just brown. That's all they are. They're just brown and gray. Okay, but usually there's something that you can tell them apart. But yeah, okay. But as disciples, what are our field marks? What are people that you say, I see that guy coming. He's a disciple of Christ. Okay, Peter, when he was waiting as Jesus was before the Sanhedrin, people notified him as a disciple. Of course, unfortunately, he denied that he was a disciple, that he was ever with Jesus. But it field marks, all right. And that was mostly his accent, the way he talked, and that he's from Galilee. That's not the main things. Obviously, we don't have to talk like we're from Galilee or act like a fisherman or rough, uneducated fisherman or whatever. What are the field marks that mark a disciple? Okay, so we're going to read just a couple. There could be more, but John 8, verse 31, excuse me. We'll go back to 30. All right. John 8, verse 30 says, "Many people who heard him say these things believed or trusted in him." So Jesus said to the Judeans or Jews who had trusted him, so he's talking to all these people who are following him, "If you obey what I say, then you really are my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." He says, some versions say, "You will hold to my teaching." Okay. But I think the "obey my commandments" is pretty much the same thing. And there's plenty of other verses that say we need to obey Jesus' commandments. I don't think I'm stepping out there too far. Because holding on to his word, I mean, I can just sit at home and read my Bible every day and feel like I'm abiding in Jesus' word, right? But I have to obey it. All right. In Matthew, what's it, 5:21. I didn't have that one written down. But anyhow, he says, on that last day, there will be many who said, "Lord, Lord, did we not do all these great things in your name?" And he says, "And I'm going to say to them, depart from me, you who work iniquity." Now, that one's kind of sobering to me, and we'll talk more about this the next time I come in here. But he didn't say, "Oh no, you haven't really done those things. You didn't cast out demons. You didn't do all these wonderful works." He says, "You didn't do what I asked you to do. You didn't obey my will." Okay, so we can be religious, we can be actively religious, but we can still not be a disciple of Christ. Okay, and so we need to be very careful that we obey His will and do what He wants. There's a verse that talks about righteous, and one place it translates the word righteous as those who do what God wants. Okay, it's very easy for us to do what we want to do to serve God, right? All right, I would like to have being able to play a harmonica be a great way to serve God because I can do that. Okay, I won't do that to y'all, but that's okay. So in some ways, when we want to use our abilities to serve God, but sometimes we want to serve God how we want to serve God. And God says, I want you to do what I want you to do. What's important to me, not what's important to you. Okay. And so we need to obey and know God's word. We have to abide in the word in the sense of study so that we understand what does God want us to do to obey his word and actually put it into effect. All right. Any questions, comments about that?
I like the way Jennifer that First John puts it. I'm looking for it right now. It talks about the love of the Father being in them if they're loving, not the
Others.
person, but if they're loving others. And it goes back to what I know we've talked about a few times, which is the greatest commandment that God gives us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. And so we just continue to see in the New Testament, it all comes back to loving others and not and being a slave to God, not being a slave to sin.
Right.
Is how that transforms us, like Paul talks about pretty clearly.
Right. It says like something like if we say we love our brother but we don't, then we say we love God but we don't love our brother, then we don't really love God. Yeah.
It's doing the hard things that because of the evil inside of us almost don't feel natural.
Right.
Like Matthew 5:44 talks about pray for your enemies.
Right.
And it's things like that. It's like that is the love that all the New Testament writers, that's the love that God is talking about. It's the opposite of what we're naturally inclined to do.
Yeah. It's like Jesus said, here's what you do, but I want you to do almost the entire directly opposite. You're right. And so that's why it's difficult. Let's go ahead and do John 13, verse 35 real quick. The second thing. So continuing his word, obeying his word. 13, verse 34 and 35 says, I am giving you a new command that you keep on loving each other. In the same way that I have loved you, you are also to keep on loving each other. Everyone will know that you are my disciples by the fact that you have love for one another. Okay. And that's kind of what John was talking about the community sense of discipleship. We can't be a disciple off by ourselves somewhere. Okay. We have to love others. And in particular, he's saying to other disciples here, and it's not even getting into loving your enemies and people who hate you and all this other thing, but you could include all that too, because he says, we need to do that. So love should be a mark of a Christian. If we're being hateful, if we're being sensuous, disrespectful, you can name all the different things to someone, belittling someone or treating them like they're not very intelligent or whatever, or that we know everything, or they don't know. I mean, just you can list all these different attitudes that aren't love, okay? And if we do any of those, then we're not being a disciple. He says that will be it. They will look at you and they'll see you doing things, because love is what? Love is doing something for someone else when it's not best for me. Okay, I mean, we could read 1 Corinthians 13, but that's a lot of that's what it comes down to. Love is doing for someone else what is not my best interest, but it's in their best interest. And so, and that goes against our nature. That's just not what we do naturally. Naturally, look out for number one. That's just what we do. Kids from about, 3 years old, well, I take that back, even younger, they're worried about them. A baby's hungry, they until someone takes care of it, okay? Hopefully, as we get more mature, we don't do that as much, okay? But we still do, as my wife says. Yeah. You can talk to my wife later. But anyhow, but that's the thing. Love is doing for others, not ourselves. The opposite of being selfish, looking out what's best for us. All right. Last one, John 15 and verse 8. says, Jesus was talking to his disciples again. If you remain united with me and my words are with you, then ask whatever you want and it will happen to you. This is how my Father is glorified. He says, here's how you glorify God, okay? We're told we need to glorify God a couple places. Well, he says, this is how you glorify God. In your bearing much fruit. This is how you will prove to be my disciple. Bearing fruit. What does that mean? We should all go grow some plants. All right. I would say, first of all, very good. The fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit talks about love, compassion, joy, gentleness, all of these things. When you look at the world around us and you see all these things going on and the hatred and division and stuff that occurs, whether it be in a family, whether it be in a country, whether it be in the world, you can almost guarantee there's not going to be examples of the fruit of the Spirit. All right. In Galatians, the 5th chapter, he talks about the works of the world. Now, these we see: adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outburst of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness. Yeah, we can watch the news and see all that, right? Pick any channel, anytime, you can do that. But he says in verse 22, the fruit of the Spirit. I like the fact that it just says fruit. This is the fruit. This is it. This will be it. Not one, or you pick some of these. He says, all these things are the fruit of the Spirit. This is what you'll be like if the Spirit's living in you. And he says, love, joy, peace, long suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such, there is no law. In other words, it's not illegal. You can do it as much as you want. The sky's the limit. He says, you can do these as much as you want. Unfortunately, if we just let ourselves live the way we normally live, our natural impulse is to go to the first things, okay? Contentions, jealousies, all these other things that he lists, okay? So we have to work at it, but it says that's what we need to have. We need to work at having those fruits of the Spirit, all right? And growing up, when it said bear fruit, it meant one thing, and that was converting people, and particularly from other churches. Okay, that was it. Okay, we need to convert people from other churches. Okay, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. We do need to convert people. Okay, and I think we need to worry about the people who are lost and have not even heard of Jesus yet. Okay, there's lots of those around. It's kind of this dichotomy. We complain about how evil this world is, but then apparently we can't find anyone in Decatur to teach. It's like, well, apparently Jesus said the fields are white unto harvest. Okay. And I don't know, you hear people, oh, things have never been as bad now. And I can go back and pick people from anywhere in history. And there's people who are saying, this is the worst it's ever been, you know. I don't know. I do know Sodom and Gomorrah, they've been 10, was it 6 or was it 10 people? That God destroyed them because they couldn't find 10 people. Okay. I don't think we're there yet. Okay. So we still got a ways to go to be the worst place ever. Okay. Let's just assume half of us aren't what we're pretending to be. We're still good. All right. So anyhow, but we can't say the world is evil. There's all this wickedness out there. It's an awful place that we live in, and then we can't find anyone that needs to hear the gospel. It's like, well, there's a disconnect there, right? So we do need to bear fruit that way. But I think if nothing, if we become the fruit of the Spirit, we will find other things to do to help and show kindness and compassion to people. Nothing says I'm a disciple of Christ like doing something against the grain. Okay. I know the first time I went to the hills, people were trying to figure me out because they said, well, why are you here? Did you have someone who died here, or you have someone you're visiting here? It's like, no, I just came to help with the service thing. And I felt like I would go, they had a piano there and I would play piano a little bit. When I say a little bit, I'm not being falsely modest. Okay. I play very little piano, but I was kind of plinking around on it. They're not a very, demanding crowd to say, okay, they're glad someone's there. And so, hey, if it doesn't sound like, banging on things, they're happy. Okay. So, whatever, but I was there, and I think the chaplain guy who came in said, I have a piano. I think he thought I was just coming there to play the piano because obviously I needed to practice, and and there was a free piano that I could get to or something. Okay. But if we're acting like disciples of Christ, people are going to look at us and think, well, why are you doing that? That doesn't make sense according to the way the world does things, because we step out and do things that aren't to our benefit, they're to others' benefit. We're looking at other people. He says that's what we need to be doing. I think if we just start bearing that kind of fruit, people will notice that, because they notice when we're not in step with the world around us. All right, any questions or comments before we go into our grand finale here? I just say grand finale because that sounds like, whoa, he's going to do something really big. Okay. Of course, people are wondering why the dirt and the rocks are up here, but we'll get to that. Oh, speaking of which, I forgot. Can someone get me some water? Just fill it up with water. That'd be good. Thank you. Okay. All right. Just to make you wonder. Okay. But let's turn to Luke 14, because this is really where we're trying to get the whole time. I think probably the to me, the big heart of this one. In Luke 14, starting verse 25, first thing it says, Jesus, large crowds are traveling along with Jesus. So first of all, let's set the tone. He is not talking to his apostles here, his very closest apostles. He's talking to these large crowds. They were people who were following him, who were disciples at some level. All right. So he's talking to them. So he could be talking to us, because he's just talking to all these people. And he says to them, thank you. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father, his mother, his wife, his children, his brothers, and his sisters, yes, and his own life besides, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own execution stake and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, your version may have not said execution stake right there. But sometimes we think, oh, I bear this cross, or I bear this cross. Keep in mind, when the Bible says cross, they're talking about an execution stake, the one you're going to die on, okay? So that's what he's saying. If you do not carry your own execution stake and come after Jesus, you cannot be my disciple. That's pretty harsh. Even if we which is probably what it means here, obviously we're not supposed to hate our father and mother. We're not supposed to hate our wife, our children, or whatever. Even if we tone that down to love less, which is probably what it means here. Unless you're willing to love those things less, that's still a big, big ask right there. Okay? And Jesus realizes that, because he tells them a story. He says, suppose you want to build a tower. Don't you sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough capital to complete it? If you don't, then when you have laid the foundation out but can't finish, all the onlookers will start making fun of you and say, this is the man who began to build, but he couldn't finish it. Or again, suppose one king is going out to wage war against another king. Doesn't he first sit down and consider whether he, with his 10,000 troops, has enough strength to meet the other king who is coming against him with 20,000? If he hasn't, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation to inquire about terms of peace. He says, hey, well, this is not going to work. They got 20,000, I got 10,000. I'm not real good at math, but that's not good. Maybe I just need to make a peace treaty here. Okay? So is Jesus encouraging people not to be his disciple or to be his disciple? That doesn't sound like a recruiting call. If we want to get people to come to church, we don't go out and say, hey, you need to hate your family. You need to give up your own life. You need to carry your own execution stake. And you need to really think about this before you decide. We don't meet someone coming down the aisle to be baptized and say, you need to think about this before you do this, okay? That's not how we do that, but that's what Jesus is doing. He's saying, are you sure you want to do this? Think about it. Count the cost. We use that expression, count the cost, but he's saying, do you want to really do this? Okay? And that's what we as disciples need to decide. Now, let's go ahead and read the last couple verses real quick, and then we'll do that. All right. So every one of you who doesn't renounce or forsake all that he has, does not give up everything you have, one version says, cannot be my disciple. Salt is excellent, but if even the salt becomes tasteless, what can it be used to season it? It is fit for neither soil nor manure. People just throw it out. Those who have ears that can hear, let them hear. He who doesn't renounce all that he has? Whoa. I mean, we sing that song, or used to a lot, that says, I surrender all, but, The verse really says, all to Jesus I surrender if I have to you, right? Isn't that what it says? I would be willing to. Does anyone's version say be willing to in there? I couldn't find any versions that said be willing to. When I talk about this verse, I have a hard time not catching myself, just automatically plugging that in. We need to be willing to. He didn't say that. What does the word renounce mean? Well, it means to renounce, to forsake, to get away. The same word is used to say bid farewell. When it says so-and-so came down to the boat and bid farewell to Saul when he left, that's the same word. He says, if you're not willing to say bye-bye to everything you have, you can't be my disciple. Whew. That's pretty harsh, but Jesus didn't pull punches, just like we talked about before. He looked at what we want to do, and then he went all the other way almost on us. All right, so this is going to represent let's just pick on time. We won't worry about money and other things. Well, let's say time. Say this represents our time. We have a pitcher full of time. The good news is we all have the same amount of time. All right. But as we get older, I don't know about you, but life seems to be a constant progression of what did I do with all my time I had when I was a student or when I was in college or before I had kids? It just seems like I get more and more stuff. So our time starts getting filled up. You know, we all have this vision of how great life was when we were kids, how we had so much time, and why did we use it better back there? But, you know, we get kids, we get a job, we get all these things, and they start filling up our life. And we say, hey, my life is full. I don't have any time for anything else. Okay. But is it really full? The scientist in me has to point out that it was full of air to begin with, but that's okay. Okay. But is it really full? Okay. Forgetting about the air for a second. Okay. Is it really full? If I get sand, now this sounded like a really good idea about 2 weeks ago when I came up with this, because my whole yard was a big sandbox. Then it rained 3 inches. And it's like, fortunately, there's one spot where the eaves cover everything and I could still find some dirt. Okay. Had to use my wife's sieve. She didn't probably appreciate that. I didn't ask, by the way, either, but I'm saying I assume she didn't. Okay. But if I put stuff in there, you know, I can still put stuff in there. All right. Now, we don't have time and I'm making a mess, so I'm not going to do all of this. But we can fill it up. Now, assume I have all the spaces in there filled with dirt. Is it full? All right. I could still pour water in there. All right. And even if it were full, I couldn't pour this much. But even if it were full, it would still soak up water in all the little spaces in there. All right. Okay. Is it full? Okay, well, technically, we could dissolve some salt in the water and it would hold a little bit more, but we won't go there. Okay, we don't have time for that. That'd be messy. Okay. And then Denver comes up in class and says, God wants you to put him first. He wants you to put for all this other stuff. And you're like, well, how am I going to stick that rock in there? Okay. Now, there are two theories of how to get more done or do this. One is the efficiency expert. If I really plan good, this is my wife, I don't plan good, so this is not me, but if I really plan good, I can cram more in there. Okay? While the kids are taking a nap, I can do this and I can do this. I have the kids on a schedule, so they'll take a nap. I can cram more in there, and that's usually what we do when we try to figure out. God says, I want you to seek the kingdom of God first. And we say, okay, yeah, okay. Well, I can cram a little in there. But the problem is that he's first. He wants it to be the biggest thing in our life. This is bigger than any of those rocks, any of the sand, any of the dirt, whatever. He wants that to be the big thing. And not only that, it's not even a pretty rock. Okay? I had this nice little egg-shaped rock at home. We collect those when we go on trips. It saves money on souvenirs. But anyhow, we get these curved rocks, and they're pretty. But it's not even a pretty one. We want to be like Jesus, and Jesus said he's not going to be desirous or beautiful or wonderful or whatever. They want to put this ugly rock in that life. I can't do that. I don't have room for it. Okay? Well, the efficiency expert's never going to be able to stick this big rock in there. Okay? You can get a little space here and there and whatever, put a little more water in there, a little more sand, whatever, but you can't get the big rock in there. The minimalist attitude is what we have to do. You just cut out all the unimportant stuff. And ideally, before we get this thing filled up, is there any way I'm going to get this rock in there? No. But if I put the rock in there first, could I do that? And that's what Jesus is trying to say to us. We need to put God first. Now, if I put that in there, first of all, notice it's going to touch all those other parts of our lives that fill up our lives. So it will touch a lot of those other things in our lives and affect how we do those. But it's not just doing those things. We have to put this discipleship piece in there. All right. It will affect the rest of our lives. We can't just say, oh, I'll be the best teacher I can be. I mean, I was a teacher. I agree with that. You know, I'm going to be a Christian at school as a teacher and be a good influence. But I can't just say, well, I'm a teacher. One of the best and worst advice I ever got when we had young kids was, right now, you just need to give yourself totally for your kids and don't worry about anything else. Obviously, you only have the time you have with your kids. They're important. And you won't come back. But on the other hand, where are they going to learn to be disciples if you're not spending the time with God first? Okay. So I'm saying put that in there first, then everything else. Now, am I going to be able to fit all this stuff in there after I put this rock in there? No. But that's what God says. Putting the kingdom first means you put that in first, then you fit in everything else that you can. All right. I'm sorry, I'm over time already, but I was close. Okay. I was really close. All right. Any comments before we leave?
When Tyler and I were going to the marriage counseling order today, our new pastor had a good comment. Like, if you have pyramids, God's top, you two at the bottom. The closer y'all get to God, the closer you move together. I always like that
That's a good
description.
I like that. I like that. And we should always be going toward God or toward Jesus. That's kind of what the whole idea of discipleship is. But all right, anything else?
We want to have a teachable answer, and then Matthew chapter 18, it says, "Time to follow Jesus of Nazareth, who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Jesus called little child to him and stirred the child before the followers, and he said, "I tell you the truth. You must change and become like children, otherwise you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. The greatest person in the kingdom of heaven is like the one who makes himself humble like a child." So it takes a sense of vulnerability, like you rely on your parents when you're young.
Right.
You rely on God as a child. You're not basing yourself on you anymore. You're coming to him like a child.
Right. And that you're right. That's the trust. You don't think about as a kid, can I trust my parent? You just assume that you can, and we need to do that with God as well and have that humility to do it. All right. Anything else? All right. I would close with a prayer, but I think we're already ready. I'm sure some people have kids that are probably their teachers saying, where are they coming to get their kid, or they leave them here? So thank you all for your comments and for your lessons. Attention this morning.